Hey, hello, everybody. Glad to see such a nice crowd. My name is Sherry Maury, and on behalf of Grace Creek Associates, I'd like to welcome you to our talk. Mike Wynn, and calling it "You Never Fish the Same Waters Twice." And before we get to the talk, I want to tell you a little bit about what Grace Creek Associates is. And it's a group of people who love nature and who want to support this wonderful field station and the environment around. And we have about 130 odd members. People just pay a real low fee, which I'm going to get to after I tell you what it's all about. And you're going to say, well, I need to be a member. Some of the things that we've been able to do, we've funded some research, student, community, faculty research through our small grant program. Try to expand the recreational opportunities that this 30 acres afford, and bring in talks like this. We have the reflection talks several times a year, monthly now. So that's some of the things that membership does. I put out this little brochure so you can read more about it if you like. And the deal is the real deal. If there's members, to become a member, and it's going up a little bit from it's $5 for a student. Individuals member is 10, and a couple family is 15. It is going up, so if you could sign up today, you get these prices. I know it's a deal. You didn't know you're going to be bargain shopping, but it's a deal. So that's an incentive. And as a member, just because it's kind of the right thing to do. But we have a really nice newsletter that comes out four times a year. That's another good reason to join Grace Creek Associates. Would any questions about that? You can see if you decide that you'd like to join. You can see me here. See Don, our treasurer, is here today. He'll sign you up and stuff.
I got a question. You always say, "Is that the best you can do?"
That's what I do when I go shopping. That's what I do when I go shopping. That's my mantra. And that is the best we can do. Okay, so no questions about that. Okay, I'd like to introduce Mike Wynn. He's been a fishing enthusiast for many years. I've known Mike, just a little personal. I've known Mike for, almost 30 years? Almost 30 years, and his enthusiasm is contagious. It's not just fishing, but it's how nature and environment all play together. In fact, I knew the family that he married into even before then. He spoke to the Adirondacks to meet them, so we know each other. So he's also a licensed fishing and camping guide in New York State, and that way for the last decade. So we're really lucky to have him here to share his expertise and his love of nature. So let's welcome him.
I want to make sure I'm standing in the right spot here. Is it okay if I stand right here? No, please, whatever you. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Coach, for coming out on such a cold day. Yeah, so someone said to me, "Oh, I'm going to be out fishing." I said, "Well, stay warm." Anyways, I'm grateful to Maurice, like Sherry said, they've been a part of our family for many moons. And quick story, at one point we were buying a house and we were homeless for almost a month, and they allowed us to stay with them. So they're just that kind of people. So that's the one thing that I love about this Oswego community, is that we just show up for each other. Right? So what a gift to be a part of that. So anyways, my mentor once said to me, "You never fish the same water twice." And this guy actually was the dean of students at one point, and he happened to live right across the street from where I work, the Newman Center. And so I was driving by when I first started there, and I noticed this pontoon boat, and I was like, "Oh, this guy's a fisherman. This is great." And after about a week, I introduced myself, and I made sure I had weekly lunch appointments with him in his office. And so his office really was his fly tying kind of station. And for many years, I did that at least once or twice a week, and it was such a great gift. And it's kind of funny because now my wife is the dean, so I get into different places because of that. I always say, well, I'm only sort of cool because I do the dean's laundry. It's still there. But anyways, this title, you never fish the same water twice. I always think about how you could go to the same lake, right? The same fishing hole, whatever it may be. But every day, if you're going to go there 6 days in a row, every day conditions change, right? The weather's different, the water level's different, temperature's different. Whatever might be the pressure. So things are always changing. And I think really what makes us successful anglers, right, or whatever it might be, is if we're willing to adapt. And you know what? I find that that's a really wonderful metaphor for life as well. Speaking of metaphors, I use a lot of them. I mean, I think that's just part of who I am. Funny story, I was driving my daughter to school 3 days ago, or whatever. And, we're having our father-dad talk because Tyler's in the back with his headphones on. He doesn't hear me. He doesn't want to hear me. And I said some sort of goofy metaphor, something like, no test or exam will ever make or break your life or something like that. And she looked at me and she's like, Dad, stop. You're allowed one metaphor a day. So I'm really glad that they're not here. So at first when, I was asked to do this, I was excited because, yeah, for me, it's nothing to hang out and tell bad dad jokes and silly metaphors about life and fishing. But I actually got really overwhelmed because there's so much to fishing, right? There's so many kinds of fishing. There's so many different ways to approach it. And this is a crazy metaphor, right? But I'm also a guitarist. I dabble in music a little bit. And the one thing that's so crazy and cool is that no matter how much you do, there's so much to learn, right? So many different styles, so many kinds of music, so many different songs to learn. And how cool is that we can walk this journey and always be learning, right? And so for me, every time I'm out fishing, I'm paying attention, I'm learning something. Whatever it is, just paying attention to those details. So anyways, thank you for being here. Just a reminder, besides the enrollment from the Rice Creek Associates, this presentation is free. And so therefore, if you don't like it, you don't get your money back. You just wasted a perfectly good hour of your time. But all right, so a little bit about me. There we go. So, some people actually choose college because of fishing. And I told people this for many years. Well, Oswego, of course, why wouldn't you choose it? The fishing is great there. And people used to laugh and joke, well, no, well, really, what was your major, or that kind of thing. And about 20 years ago, Fly Rod and Reel, which is a national syndicated magazine, ran an article or front page cover on different colleges where you could major in fishing. Major meaning you could spend a lot of time, there's a lot of opportunities and whatnot. And so anyways, they highlighted Oswego. We were number 4 in the country. Right? Might have changed, but this was about 18 years ago. And one of the really neat things was when the Post Standard called, because they wanted to do a human interest story, they called Oswego, and somebody, Tim Nackert said, you need to talk to my twin. So this is one of my most proudest accomplishments because I was in the newspaper for picking school because of the fishing. It's obviously true. Because nowadays it's like if it's on the internet, it's obviously true. Right? But at one point the newspaper was the deal. So yeah, I was in the newspaper for picking school because of fishing. And the neatest and craziest part of that was at that point I was actually a school counselor, helping folks choose their schools. And you wouldn't believe my phone ran off the hook. People like, wait a minute, you chose your school because of fishing, and now you're helping my child? There's something wrong. But so anyways, just a couple quick things about myself. I love soccer. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing, coaching, playing, whatever it is. I love food and anything outdoors. I'm a trained counselor, and so a lot of my background is listening and being observant, I think that helps me when I'm fishing. It helps me pay attention. I'm grateful to my parents. As I was prepping for this, I was thinking about my parents who were refugees, came from Vietnam as the boat people. And my dad taught me to fish, but I think about how different we view fishing, because for him, it was sustenance, right? It was about eating. And for me, it's like recreation, it's for play. Fun fact, I don't even like eating fish, you know? But I spend most of my life chasing them. So I'm so grateful for that opportunity that we live in a country where we can pursue our passions and do it for fun. Like, how cool is it? I've been a licensed guide for more than a decade for hiking and camping. And what that means, I guess, really is that you can keep people safe. It doesn't mean I'm very good at fishing, but I always tell people, if you're good, people will know and they'll come back to you. They'll keep taking, asking you to take them out for whatever reason. If you're not good, then at least you can keep people safe, right? So I always say that that's kind of my caveat with it. But for me, I love the outdoors. I love this area. And so for me, all I want to do is share. So, in terms of outdoor stuff, I've hiked the Norfolk Placid Trail probably 7 times over. It's just, I love being outdoors. And you'll hear me say this 1,000 times, but if you love the outdoors, we live in paradise. We really do. And then in terms of sharing my passion with others, I've been part of the fishing club and the advisor to the fishing club for just about a decade now, since the inception. And really what we do is we just share the resource with people. I actually have a really cool book here that someone put together for me. And it's just a picture of people's first fish, the first time a student comes out and catches a salmon or steelhead with me. And it's cool. And actually there's a couple of guys in here who became full-time guides. So it's just neat that we can pass and share that. Yeah. All right. So when I was prepping for this talk, I was thinking about how obviously can't cover all of fishing, right? But I can cover it from my unique perspective. And my perspective, I guess, is kind of a wholeness and wellness model. I think when you talk about ecology and what nature does for us and human ecology, there's a connection, right? And so when you look at this wellness wheel, like, I'm pretty sure that fishing can touch a few of those things, right? Whether it be emotional wellness, spiritual wellness, physical, right? If you're hiking up and down a stream, you can get tuckered out at the end of the day, all that fresh air, right? I mean, the only one that I think I would struggle with is if there's one for financial. It's not on this one. I think I did that on purpose because my wife always tells me it doesn't help financial health at all. But I made sure I use a different wheel to make sure I avoid that. But I think the big part of my philosophy, though, I think, is having fun. Right? If we're not enjoying ourselves and having fun and maybe growing from the experience, why do it? Right? Why do it? And one of the things that bother me the most is when you run into folks who are like elitist about it, kind of making it untouchable for folks. And that drives me up the wall because this is something that we need to share with everybody, right? And so for instance, I'm really lucky because I'm a guide and I have some connection. I get some discount on stuff, and so I have nice gear, right? And I remember during the summer, like I don't care about the gear. I just wear shorts and old sneakers, and I'm tromping the water, right? And I remember walking up on these fishermen in the Salmon River one day, and they were all decked out. I call it the Sims fit, where their whole outfit is probably like $2,000 and all that. And I just wanted to talk to them because I'm just kind of one of those happy kind of, hey, how's it going? And they looked at me and they didn't give me the time of day. It's just kind of like, oh, this guy's in shorts, like this guy's not wearing waders. And I purposely went, kind of up a couple holes and started nailing fish and, didn't catch anything. And I was like, oh, releasing fish. I felt kind of a jerk afterwards, but for me, it's all about, no, you can't make it untouchable for people. It's something that we need to share with everybody. Right? So for me, that's one of the greatest gifts. So impacts of nature. I mean, I think a lot of what this space is about, this this Rice Creek space is recognizing how nature and the environment affects us as humans and our roles in it, right? And I mean, there's tons of research, as you already know, how nature really decompresses you, right? And this idea of, when I think about the word recreate, right? That whole idea of recreating. And I really believe that all of us as humans, in some way, want to reconnect with creation, with nature. So I don't care how you do it, right? You could be chasing a little white ball on this beautiful greens, cross-country skiing, climbing trees, sailing, whatever it might be, fishing. It's really because we as humans really want to reconnect with creation. And so I think about the genius, right, of like Central Park, you know, beautiful green spaces like this. What a gift it is to have that. And so most, I think, outdoor activities kind of ground us. So that's, I guess that's kind of my take on it because of who I am. All right. So I mentioned it before, we live in paradise when it comes to different angling opportunities. A few years ago, I was doing a guided hiking trip, and one of the folks in the party was a woman from Texas. And, you know, we're driving along, getting to our next trailhead, kind of entryway for this hike. And she said, Mike, I've never seen so much water. And right there and then I took it for granted how much water we have around us. Every nook and cranny, there's some sort of ditch with water running in, right? And I remember even as a kid, every time I saw water, I thought, oh, there's gotta be fish in there. But the reality is that we're so blessed with having that. And she was mentioning how for her in Texas, most bodies of water were human-made, you know, dams, right? So for us, we really do live in that kind of paradise. When we talk about the seasons here, it really is a year-round tradition. When I think about, you know, the opportunities that we have in Oswego County, obviously it's New York and beyond, Northeast, but there's something to do in every season. So I'm just going to give you a quick snapshot. Might bore you, but it's kind of my perspective on my life and how I view the seasons. However, in winter, I'm steelheaded. I'm in the river all the time, and the colder and nastier it is, the better, because that means less people. Right? There's other options. You could ice fish. You could, you know, do all other things, but that's what I do. Is I spend most of my winter steelheading. In the spring, guess what? You can steelhead again. But then you add to it fishing for perch, for walleye. Walleye season always opens up near my birthday. That's how I remember it. You can do all that kind of stuff. You can troll on the lake, right? When I have a lot of friends who run boats out of some of these ports, and the minute ice out, they're on the lake, right? Chasing fish. In the summer, we have so many warm water species here. You can chase bass. You can, you know, still go trolling in the lake, you know, in deeper waters for other kinds of fish. You can still find trout in all these little streams. And then in the fall, the salmon run. And guess what? You start all over again. So it's kind of funny. My wife thinks I have way too much stuff, so I'm really glad that she's not here. But I have stuff for every season. Because with every kind of fishing that you do, you have different gear, right? And I got to the point where I was getting confused in every season that I just bought a different jacket for every season, just to make sure I had my stuff organized, because it would take me at least 3 trips to make sure that I had everything I needed. Like, oh, I forgot that, it's in a different jacket or whatever. So I finally got to the point where I just made sure that I had different jackets for different kinds of fishing. When we talk about the different kinds of fishing, I know this is so overwhelming for me. The equipment that you use, it's just, yeah, it's like any hobby, right? There's so much stuff you can accumulate. So I'm just going to touch on a few common methods that we use here. So just a few quick things. So these, I mean, there's so many other ways of fishing, but these are just some basic ways that you can fish around here. So bait fishing, using jigs and whatnot. So this is a regular spin reel. It has a built-in drag up here, so it kind of provides some resistance and whatnot. funny story. I don't know if it's this walleye or not, but so that was a 35.5-inch walleye. And I brought it home and gave it to somebody and stuck it, in their freezer and whatnot. And I sent this picture to one of my friends and he said, "Did you measure that thing? Because that's pretty big." So, I measured it, but I mean, I just cut out, it was like 34.5 inches or something like that. And he texted me back, the record is 32 inches. So there you go. Makes for a great fish story, right? Makes for a great fish story. Right, exactly. Somebody ate it. Weird. Trolling. So there's different kinds of trolling. Obviously, on the big lake here in the spring and summer and fall, people use side planers just to get their lines kind of away from their boat. They use downriggers to get them down. You're fishing different temperatures. It's amazing. I mean, if you look at this lake in the spring, the temperatures start warming up. It's distracting. You just kind of hang out and watch boats all day and not do any homework, I oftentimes think about, there was a long time ago before the coffee connection was where it is now. It used to be right on the river. And that's where I studied. And I used to just hang out and watch people fish all day. So lots of distractions. And that's a picture of my son and I trolling. He was just pulling a lure in the summer. And then there's spin fishing and bait casting. This is a center pin reel. And what it is it's on one bearing and it kind of rolls, right? There's no resistance. The only resistance is your hand. And so I oftentimes say when you do something like this, it's just you and the fish. But that's just another example of all the different kinds of fishing and gear that you can use. And stop me at any time if you have any questions. I've got lots of stories and bad jokes. All right, fly fishing. So with fly fishing, what you're doing is you're using the weight of the line to cast and to roll it out. But on the end of the line, obviously, is a fly. I mean, you could probably do a 3-hour presentation just on tying flies. But I don't have a degree in entomology or anything like that, but I do enjoy tying flies. But it's so cool. There's so many different kinds of weights and different kinds of fish that you can chase with a fly rod. But yeah. And that was my son and his first steelhead. I taught him, he's one of those super competitive dudes. And he's like, "I got this, Dad. I got it." Whoa, whoa, whoa. And he cast it, and on his third cast, he got that. That's good. I put him in the right spot, though. All right. So when we talk about world-class fishing, it's amazing. I mean, here in our county alone, there's like 14 New York State and world records just in our home waters here. Like an example of a couple of records from just a couple of years ago. I think she caught that on like really light tippet, and for the weight of the fish, I think she caught 2 of the world records like within a couple of days of each other. But then in terms of New York State records, I think we hold a whole bunch of them from our home waters here. So when we talk about the opportunity for world-class fishing, it's right here in our backyard. Pretty amazing. Yeah. No coincidence that I live here. So when we talk about our fishery, I got overwhelmed because there's so many kinds of fish here. Like everything from big fish to warm water to, I mean, I'm not going to scroll through them all, but it's so cool, right? It's so cool. Like every time you go out, like there's so many opportunities, and let's just hope I can get back. But when we talk about the warm water and cold water, a lot of that is just depending on where you're fishing, depth of water and time of year and whatnot. So, during the summer, like I spent a lot of time on ponds and streams and whatnot, but most of my time is actually spent on the Salmon River. I live probably about 12 miles away from there. So I spend most of my time chasing cold water species. So one of the coolest things that I find about the fishing here that sometimes gets overlooked is the economic impact, right? We bring in close to $32 million because of the fishing industry. And when you think about how that impacts so many people, right? Everybody from guides to lodging. And when you're talking lodging, it's anything from a campsite to, a high-class Hilton in Altmar, Herbals, whatever it might be. Those 6 weeks of salmon season, I mean, it affects other parts of the seasons in the year and whatnot, but those 6 weeks of salmon season, for instance, some people are staying in Syracuse just to have a place to lay their head. I mean, it's amazing how far people come from. You think about tackle shops in Pulaski, there's like a dozen tackle shops that, and I think 8 or 9 of them are open year round. Like, that's kind of crazy, I think, anyways. In this little podunk town to have that many kind of, I mean, obviously they bank on that short season, right? But to have that right here in our county, it's kind of cool. Everything from restaurants to gas stations to marinas to guys. I mean, it's amazing the impact that really has on our county. And the reality is people come from all over the world. I know that some of our students here in some of their classes will take field trips up to some of the parking areas during salmon season just to see how many license plates they can find. And I mean, on any given day, there's 6, 7 different states. A couple of years ago, I had a couple of clients out on the river, and lo and behold, there was a guy from England down below me, and he watched me kind of, put these folks on fish. And about 3 hours later, he walked up to me. He's like, "So, can I hire you for tomorrow?" I mean, I guess that the proof is in the pudding, right? Because he saw me doing it, and but he just happened to be from England, and it was actually cool because he ran this neat website in England, and you could, just his commentary, like fishing just sounds more exciting in a different accent, But anyway, it was pretty cool to be able to, to be that. I oftentimes think too about the economic impact on this area. So I'm a transplant. My wife and I moved here 30 years ago for school. We never left, but I love this area. Not only are the people great, as I talked about earlier, but just the opportunities here. It's funny because I feel like I should be a spokesperson for Oswego County or something. They put out these little reels. I don't know if you've seen them about Oswego County tourism. And I feel like I'm going to cry every time I see one, because it's so beautiful. Seeing like the falls and the fishing, and we live in such a great place. So I'm going to share a little bit about this unique fishery. And I'm going to specifically talk a little more about Salmon River and the trips there, only because that's where I spend most of my time. But the Salmon River was actually named because there was a native population of Atlantic salmon. And one of the things that I think always happen when we talk about human ecology is when you put humans in it, we always find a way to screw it up. So we overfished it, right? And decimated the Atlantic salmon fishery. And it wasn't until the 60s when we started transplanting and putting in some of these trout and salmon. And partly that was because there was an alewife problem. There was a problem with bait fish. And what happened was there was no natural predator for them. So they were just kind of washing up on shore and just stinking everything up. Like you can imagine like needing a bulldozer to push all this bait fish aside. And it just made everything stink and smell. And so somebody thought, well, hey, let's put some bigger fish in there to kind of balance that out a little bit, right? And so I always laugh and say that this was kind of the fishery by mistake. We just happened to try that out, and it worked. And who would have thought that it would have boomed into this $32 million industry that affects, everyone here and the infrastructure that we have built for that. And so I always think that that's so cool that, that happened, I guess. And so when you look at that, it's amazing. It really hasn't been that long. Well, I guess add up the years, it's longer than some of us, but it really is. It's in some of our lifetime, right? Which is pretty amazing.
Mike, there are still some Atlantic salmon in the lake now.
Yes. Yep. So they recently started stocking them too. I don't have a picture here, but I caught like a 12-pound one a couple years ago. It's a unicorn, because you don't catch many of them. And I remember just thinking, oh my goodness, like I can't believe it. Yeah. So they're actually coming back. I feel like in the last few years, you'll see more and more of them. Yeah. But
just as a sidebar, when the Oswego Derby started, at the weigh-in stations and whatever, there wasn't a category for Atlantic salmon, which was kind of ironic in the different natives.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it's amazing how we kind of go in and around that. All right. So why is this important to me? I always think that, again, like I said, if you throw humans into it, we have a way of screwing it up. But what I always remind people of is what gives me great hope is the bald eagle, right? Because we decimated that population. But because of us realizing, oh, we can do something to fix this, now you can drive around and actually see bald eagles, And so that gives me hope that we as humans, hopefully, if we kind of do the right thing, we can actually kind of be part of the system in a way that's less impactful and actually creating good versus, just taking things away. The other part of this that I think is really important for me is, we live in a world now that is full of turmoil and different things. And I oftentimes ask myself, how do I make a difference? And I think that that's something that I think we ought to always be asking ourselves. And I feel like I'm very privileged in terms of my work, and I get to work with some of the most, I guess, cream of the crop students, right? And so for me, they're always asking the questions, how then shall I live? Or how do I want to live my life out? What are my values? And I think for me, it's a privilege to walk along with them while they're doing that, because that affects me and makes me ask those questions, right? And so why is fishing important to me? I really believe if you take someone out and you give them a great experience, they're going to care about that. They're going to care about clean water all of a sudden. They're going to care about, not decimating our fishery. They're going to care about that. And so for me, if we find whatever that is for us, that really can make a huge difference. So I guess that's why I do what I do in life. So I have this book here that I'll leave here. Just if people want to look at stuff. And I think, questions or stories? Or... Yes.
There's still smelt in the lake.
There are some, not tons like there used to be. But I feel like some of that just depends on where you are too. Like I used to go smelting all the time in Cayuga Lake, but the way it is now, you'd be lucky if you catch 3 of them,
Is it because they were fished out, or what happened?
I think it's sometimes just the balance of some of the larger fish and how they consume them. There was a time in the 80s, I think, where a lot of my friends would talk about you would put on your fish finder and it would just be clouds of bait fish, and that's changing, because I really believe that the ecosystems are always shifting a little bit. Not to mention like the effects of invasive species and all the things that happen just naturally. But I guess there used to be tons of smelter. I believe people used to go to the Oswego River and talk about dipping and just filling their nets with them.
People used to, we have a restaurant now.
Yeah.
That we went to now a long time.
Sure.
Like going out for fried fish.
Sure.
What are they inside? What smells are?
So they're little bait fish, probably about 6-7 inches long, but they're very edible. You fry them up and it's kind of like eating a very sweet French fry. I guess my whole life is based around food, so that's my analogy. Well, it tastes like a French fry, so.
Similar to sardines.
Yeah.
Basis.
Right. But I think with the smelt, when they're deep fried, right, the bones almost kind of disintegrate. So
You can still get them.
yep.
And where?
They're running.
Yeah, they're probably frozen too. So
Yeah, when we caught them, we just cut the heads off, split them up under the belly, clean the belly out, and throw them right in the frying pan. Scales
I'm
and
sorry. I'm sorry.
Bullheads.
Yeah, they're still bullhead. Yep. In the spring, you can find them in a inlet, and if you drive along the lake, you see a bunch of people fishing at night in lanterns. And yeah, I don't know if I should share the story about smell, but I will. When I was a student, and this is really funny because I almost failed out because my first semester I spent more time fishing, and my first Mark thinks I came here because of the psychology department, but I came here because of the fishing, believe it or not. And I had something really much shame. It was like not even a 1, it was like a point something. And I remember academic probation, and I remember thinking, man, I really like it here. So if I want to stay and keep fishing, I need to like go to class. Wisdom. But anyways, the story about smelt was we used to just, our lives were based around fishing. So one day, 2 of my buddies kind of got a carload together and we drove down to Cayuga Lake and we caught a bunch of smelt, brought it back. And, in the dorms, there's only one kitchen in the basement and it's probably not meant for fish fries. So, you know what happened? Like it just stunk the whole place up and, what is going on? I don't know what's going on. But that's my smelt story. You're going to ask.
I just had a question because I know I think it was about 4 years ago now. They reduced stocking of salmon on the lake.
Yep.
I know for the areas mostly around Soda, so I've noticed it's affecting the fishery around there. How has it affected the fishery in say like this area?
Right. So behind the science of it, I'm not a biologist, but what I know is that sometimes the stocking is really based on what the forage is, right? If we have enough. So I think sometimes as humans, we're always thinking what's right in front of us, what's best for us. And so the minute you hear, oh, they're reducing stocking, oh, that's going to affect me and my fishing, right? But I think part of it is if the forage base isn't there, you can't just add more fish because then it'll decimate it, right? Because recently they've talked about increasing it again. So I think it's trying to be in balance with the ecosystem and knowing, all right, do we have enough to sustain this, right? With that question, I mean, I feel like the last couple of years have been still very strong and phenomenal. So, so maybe that was the right decision. No.
Well, up north, I'm from up north, Henderson Harbor,
Sure.
and here for years, all the smelt, perch and everything's fantastic. But they started stocking too much up there and it decimated the perch, the bass.
Sure.
Now they backed off on the stocking and that stuff's coming back.
Right. Yeah, it's all about the balance, right?
Yeah.
So Mike, do you know anything about like some of the smaller rivers and creeks will come in and they'll shock it and they kill some of the fish? What is the purpose of that,
Are you talking about like for counts or for? I don't think they do it to kill the fish. Is it just to stun them so they can like see what's there? Or?
Well, I don't. All I remember is trying to go fishing this one creek up north, and
Yep.
Somebody came by and said, "Well, you're not going to catch anything," and they just shocked it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that was all about.
Yeah. So I know that in some tributaries, what they'll do is they'll shock fish, but that's more to stun them, so they can get a sense of like a creel census to see what's in there. I know they do that in the Cayuga Inlet. They do that in some places. I don't know if they would go in there just to decimate the population. Yeah, I don't think that they would probably do that. I know that the sea lampreys are an issue. It's funny because the last couple of years, if you pull the fish out of the river or the lake, they were all full of lamprey scars and eels. And part of the reason why was because this pandemic thing called COVID, the company that treated the waterways for these lamprey eels was from Canada. So they couldn't come in to take care of it. So, you know, when you go to a fish cleaning station, it's like, yeah, they're just all scarred up, but it's starting to improve because they've been able to treat it the last year. And, yeah.
And the connection there was that when lampreys were a real big problem across the Great Lakes, they would go out and they would clear out the lampreys as much as they could with shock.
Sure. Yes.
Let's say I go to a river, you know, you go to places, you take people where you know there are fish, you know you're gonna catch it, right? You know you're gonna throw a line out, you know that.
I don't always know.
But I mean, you don't send it.
Sure.
Every year. So if I were to go fishing, how do I know where to go? How do I know how to catch it? How do I learn how to catch it? Instead of observing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is trial and error, just like anything, right? We're always learning and we learn from our mistakes. I may be biased, but I always say if you can hire a guide, partly because the years of knowledge that someone puts on the river or the lake or whatever, they have a good sense, right? My philosophy when I take people guiding is that I want to teach them so that they don't need me the next day. I mean, that's just my philosophy. Not everyone thinks that way. Some people think, oh, I'm never letting them out of the boat because I need, you know, it's part of their life, and that's fine. Everyone's got a different philosophy. But mine has always been one of teaching. But in terms of finding places, yeah, a lot of it is just trial and error and learning. And I mean, nowadays there's this tool, the internet. It's amazing, right? You can learn and find anything. And I know that, you know, like for me, even like I'm always learning. So there's always unique things that keep changing. For instance, you know, this particular reel, the center pin reel, that hasn't been around forever. Yes, in Europe or whatever, but here in our fishery, it's only been like the last 20 years or so. And I still remember learning about it. And what it is just kind of a free wheel bearing kind of reel. But on the end, you're using these little plastic beads. And I remember thinking, what is going to bite a plastic bead? You know, but it makes sense, right? Because it looks more natural to see a single egg rolling down the river versus like a claw, you know? So, but you're always learning.
I was going to ask two questions. One was, what was the first fish that you remember catching? And then is there still something that you are seeking to catch?
Yeah. Well, first memories of fishing. I think I alluded to this earlier, but my poor mom, rumor has it I was born with a fishing pole, but I remember every body of water that we drove by, like I was always like, oh, there's got to be fish in there. Like, I think I saw a fish jump, Dad. And, you know, he was like, oh, whatever, Dad. But when I was a kid, we lived probably half a mile from this pond, and that's what I spent, you know, so probably bluegill or bass or whatever. But in terms of this fishery, the first time I fished, I didn't even catch a fish. I remember it was February because I heard about these steelhead, and literally like 5 minutes into it, I took a spill. So I'm already worried about hypothermia, you know, but I was going to power through it because we just drove 3 hours because I was, you know, a teenage kid and stupid. And we kept fishing and didn't do anything because we didn't know what we were doing. We drove 3 hours here. We had some lunch and I went down to the town. And I'm like, oh, this looks like a deep run. And third cast, like something, a steelhead grabbed it and just took like a 14-second run, hopped off. And I remember just sitting, wow, that was amazing. And so my first fish in this fishery, I didn't even land, but that's what kind of hooked me, right? Like the idea that this powerful fish can just, yeah, take you for a ride and you literally have no control. So that was like my first memory of here. Yeah, so my dad and his friend brought me here when I was a teenager. And yeah, just kind of whenever we could, we'd take road trips up here. I was the kid, not everyone is from New York, but we have this thing called Regents. And I remember in between regions, most people would be cramming for their next test. And my buddies and I would, well, we've got 3 hours, let's go fishing. Like, that's just who I am. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts or bad jokes?
And so far, is there still something that you're
Chasing.
yeah.
Yeah. There's always things that I'm chasing. I've yet to catch a muskie. You know, I've caught most other freshwater fish. I've had one on. I was walleye fishing and reeling in a walleye, and then a muskie definitely hit it because when I pulled it up, half the walleye was gone. But yeah, I've yet to land one. I feel like, yeah, that'd be fun. But I still, to this day, steelhead are my first love. If my wife were here, I wouldn't say that, but steelhead, there's just something about them. They're beautiful, the colors. But I think partly is because they're also very challenging. You know, you could spend all day freezing just freezing and doing your best to stay warm, but all it takes is one hit, and you forget about all that. It's weird.
In your experience, what's the most effective way to fish the Oswego River during the run in terms of gear?
Yeah. There's so many ways. A lot of people pull plugs. You can fish skein. I didn't talk about this, but the evolution of the fishery has changed too. There was a time when people used snatch hooks, you know, like the 3-prong treble hooks with this big weight on them. They were just dangerous. Like I remember them flying around like, oh, like that would not be good if you got one lodged in your head, right? But what happened was when I talk about this fishery by mistake, or not really by mistake, but kind of you didn't expect this. People will come and just be ripping to grab these fish, and when they realize that, oh, they'll actually bite, and you don't need to do that, right? So on this river, just bottom bouncing or using skein works really well. They've got a really great system here where you kind of get in line and you just walk the wall, then you kind of come back up. And when I was a student here, I had a bike and I strapped my rod to the long part of the bike, and that's how I used to get down the river. And this river, the Oswego River, in terms of density of fish, is probably, in terms of percentage, like probably the most densely populated with fish because of the short distance between the dam and the lake itself. So it's an amazing fishery, and it's one of those things too. Once you get off of the concrete wall, you actually feel like you're in the middle of nowhere, which is kind of so. Yes.
I swim a lot behind the college campus. And a couple of summers ago, is it possible I saw Lake Sturgeon?
Yeah, there's sturgeon.
Because I was swimming. I'm not afraid of seeing anything, but I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was swimming along, and suddenly there was a giant movement off to the left, and I was out pretty deep.
Right.
And then it just kind of disappeared. And I've never seen anything that big. So the only thing I could think of was.
Absolutely. They catch them sometimes in the river.
I heard that, but I never, so they might be in the lake.
Right. So they run the river to spawn at times, but they could be they're definitely in the lake. And
So are they coming back?
I don't know
I know they're starting to be able to become involved in
Right.
Superior, but I didn't know what was happening.
Yeah, I know that they have a stocking program in Oneida Lake, and it's doing pretty well. I don't know about the numbers here in Lake Ontario, but definitely, I mean, this is kind of a side note and funny story. I was walking around campus one day. Obviously, our students come from wherever, right? And there was a break in the lake, and the student was like, "I think that's a whale." No, but yes, they're very large fish, and sturgeons are definitely present in them. I mean, they can get 7-8 foot long and they're
Yeah.
At the turn of the century, in 1900, there was a huge industry of sturgeon fishing. They got the fish out. There's no.
They screwed it up again.
Think like Winnebago, Wisconsin. Had a lot of sturgeon back in the day. There are clean water fish, and I think pollution, are.
Any other question?
Back to fishing the Oswego River. What's the most effective way to fish walleye there? Since I know they're in there.
Yeah.
I've had my fair share of shortly.
Yeah. So for walleye, obviously it's a springtime, summertime fishery, right? And the crazy thing about the walleye here are their eyes are like the size of $50. I mean, they're humongous. So usually what I would do is I would jig for them. So bottom bounce with a big jig and a worm or plastic. If you go down further, you can use Rapalas. If you are ever here during the spring, it's kind of crazy. Actually, in the dark, you have these boats just kind of doing circles in the lower mouth. And so you can use Rapalas. At the lower end of the river, it used to be the old Coleman's, but that area, there's a thing you would call the walleye walk, when you just kind of cast and just walk up and down. And so yeah, jigs, Rapalas.
Then time of year.
Usually spring into summer. Yep. Spring is always tricky here because the runoff sometimes makes everything unfishable, right? But the minute it drops, but usually June is phenomenal. Yeah, and you can actually cast for them anywhere, like anywhere on shore, because at night they come in and they're feeding on the bait fish, so you can hang out and cast Rapalas and
For sure.
Yep. We'll connect. You're a first year student, right?
Yeah.
You had mentioned in your talk about how the salmon were introduced and the steelhead and whatnot because of the sort of like the bait fish thing with the AOFs that were going on. And with that kind of coming back and maybe mimicking what was here previously hundreds of years ago, have you over your years seen any other sorts of other animals that have now come back because of maybe these larger predators like the salmon, other than humans, coming back as well and being in the ecosystem? Yeah.
Well, I mentioned the bald eagle, right? The fact that we took steps to ensure that would happen, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if being reintroduced, but I've noticed my fair share of seeing more fishers. But I don't know if that's more because of climate and whatnot, but I've seen more and more of them. But I've seen bobcat, just kind of coming back in the southern tier, which is pretty amazing. But that's all anecdotal, right? That's, for me anyways. Yeah. But it gives me hope, right? It gives me hope that we as humans can rectify some of our, because most of the time it's us screwing it up. So. Great. Well, in the interest of time, I just want to say thank you so much.
And thank you, everybody that's here. Don't forget to, and if you want to become a member, I think I already told you that, no, it's possible. Our next reflections talk is going to be landscaping and pruning native plants. So it's March 25th. So be looking for that on the schedule. And thank you so much for coming. Have a great day.